Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Joseph Lam, and also Ji-Young Lee and Sue Schreck from the Confucius Institute here at the University of Michigan. And thank you, Professor Christian DePay. It's true, this all comes from a footnote in the dissertation, and sometimes it's fun to burrow down and try to figure something out from one of those small pieces. So it's a fairly focused topic, but hopefully reveals something broader as well. So I'd like to begin by observing that it is a truth, universally acknowledged, that an image of a woman without clothing must be in want of an explanation. Why, and more pointedly for whom, has she brought her full powers, whether of sexuality or fertility, to bear? Archaeologists and scholars of early China have puzzled over this question since 1979, when a wall painting of a nude woman was uncovered in a tomb in the western province of Gansu, in the town of Jiuquan, which lies in what's called the Hexi corridor. And the Hexi corridor is about a 1,000-kilometer stretch along the Silk Roads. And it's a very rich archaeological site because geographic features forced the convergence of these routes of trade, of conquest, and of pilgrimage. And so the Qinghai Tibetan Plateau here being very formidable, and the Gobi Desert over here, the oasis towns of the Hexi corridor are sort of like green beads on a necklace, and travelers would go along that route. Around Jiuquan, where the desert meets oasis, the area is dotted with thousands of tomb mounds dating back to China's colonization of the Hexi corridor in the Han Dynasty. And the tomb housing our mysterious nude woman is the Dingjiazha tomb, and it's named for the neighborhood in which it's situated, and this is a modern structure that guards the entrance to the tomb. The tomb has been dated from the late 4th to the early 5th century, during the middle of more than 3 centuries of disunion and upheaval in China, known as the Six Dynasties. And so if we enter through this recently built structure, we would descend down a narrow and quite a damped, ramped corridor that extends for 33 meters, and this evens out at the threshold to the chambers. And here, there's a tall facade that goes up one plane of an air shaft. And this shows that the bricks here, if you can imagine them being taken away, they were used to seal the tomb after the burial. But this is how you enter the tomb, and it's quite awkward for a person. It's about this tall, and you have to pass through this narrow passageway. But what it does is it accommodates a corpse very naturally, a corpse on a gurney. And then you come in here to the main chamber with a vaulted ceiling and a sunken floor. And it has evidence of once abundant burial goods, most of which had already been plundered by thieves. And vibrant paintings stretch across the surfaces of plastered walls and ceiling panels, and these were found intact. The rear chamber, like other tombs in the area, has a barrel-vaulted ceiling, and it was more simply furnished, but it was found to have the deteriorated coffins and remaining bones of a male occupant along with 2 female occupants. The painting of the nude woman appears on the bottom of the south wall of the front chamber. And examining this wall, we see that a heavenly scene unfurls over the top panel of the ceiling. So that's the vaulted ceiling. The upper register of the wall beneath shows people farming. And the bottom register is dominated by a majestic tree, and it is beneath this that we locate the woman. The tree is rooted at the center of the scene, and drawing close, we see that its expansive canopy is in full leaf and heavy with white fruit. As our eyes travel along the sinuous branches, we encounter a number of creatures. These include a black bird up in the uppermost branch, and a parrot with a red beak and claws. He's perched among the leaves in the middle. And what is most curious, however, is there's a furry critter scrambling along the limb below. He is directly above the woman, who bends at the waist and knees as she approaches the tree trunk. Both she and the tree stand on a wide platform, probably made of tamped earth. The platform is supported by 7 red columns capped with dougong, which are the traditional brackets used in Chinese architecture. Paintings in early Chinese tombs act as part of a program. That is to say that the architecture, the carvings, the goods and figurines, the inscriptions, and the rituals are not random or decorative and placed in a haphazard formation, but they perform in concert to advance specific aims related to burials. Given this, along with the fact that the other paintings in this particular tomb conform to established conventions, we can infer that the meaning of this image was explicit to the patrons who commissioned the tomb and the painters who adorned it. It has since become obscure, but by knitting together textual evidence, a close analysis of the painting, and the tomb architecture, I hope to peel back layers of meaning surrounding the woman, her nudity, the tree, the platform, and the agile little monster, to show that they are inextricably connected to one another and the surrounding tomb program. The majority of scholarly opinion supports the theory that the majestic tree represents Shi, an ancient earth deity that presided over local plots of land and ensured the survival and well-being of communities. And this theory is buttressed by the platform upon which the tree stands. This feature is seen in numerous other tombs from the Han Dynasty that decorate, and also in shrines. This theme of trees on platforms is seen and is believed to represent localized worship of Shi. The identity of the woman and the grounds for her nudity, however, are draped in a patchwork of theories that, with one exception, fail to plausibly connect her actions to known rituals involving Shi. For example, one scholar proposed that the woman is engaged in a sacred sexual rite that circulated from the Mediterranean to this juncture of the Silk Roads. It's pretty racy, but there's nothing explicit in the picture that would signal a carnal liaison. Another conjecture is that the woman is participating in a mid-spring sacrifice, like those documented in the Hohan Shu, a history of the Eastern Han period. That text, however, explicitly states that such offerings were made at ancestral temples and not to Shi. One expert even cast doubt on the gender of the figure in the first place. He concedes that the person's lips are pink, but he points to the blocky brow, the rotund belly, and the knotty limbs to argue that the painting depicts a man. I believe that the figure is female, in part because the square forehead and twin bun hairstyle is similar to those seen on female dancers on another wall of the tomb. Yet these questions surrounding gender themselves raise an intriguing point. If the figure is female, why are her distinguishing physical characteristics, her breasts and so forth, carefully obscured by her limbs? Adding to the mystery is the fact that her body is awkwardly rendered. Her arms and torso are disproportionate, her thighs look more like an animal's haunches, suggesting that something compelled the artist to grapple with a female nude, even though he was working outside of a tradition immersed in anatomical knowledge and naturalistic rendering. In other words, nudity is clearly meaningful here, but the picture confounds facile associations with sexuality, fecundity, or even beauty. Turning our attention to the animal climbing in the branches of the tree, it is generally thought to be some sort of simian, but sundry opinions fail to connect it meaningfully to the woman. One scholar contends that it demonstrates that Shi is flourishing, whatever that means, while another wonders whether it suggests a connection between the tomb occupant and the Qiang pastoral tribe. This view seems far-fetched. There is no evidence in the tomb indicating that the occupant had ancestral or other cultural affiliations with the Qiang, who are one of the oldest pastoral tribes in China and sometimes described as Proto-Tibetan. They dwelled in the Western Mountains, and their populations are declining by the 3rd century, though they are depicted in tombs in the surrounding area, as this image is an example of. These paintings of Qiang date to about 100 years earlier than the Dingjiazha tombs, and the appearance of people conforms closely to textual descriptions, describing hair worn loose around the face and draping over the shoulders. So none of these are depicted with simians or furry mascots in or out of trees. Only the scholar Yue Banghu puts forth a hypothesis that binds the woman to the animal, or the animal to the woman. He thinks that the creature is Qiangliang, a legendary hybrid, and is here shown combating a drought, personified by the spirit Hanba and represented by the woman. Like Yue, I believe that the painting shows an attempt to subdue a drought, except I argue that it is the animal that represents the drought spirit Hanba, while the woman is shown reenacting an ancient ritual to bring rain. I base this in part on a brief but enthralling account found tucked in the Taiping Yulan, a compilation of texts assembled in the 10th century. A chapter titled Praying for Rain describes an incident that took place in the state of Yan in northeast China, and this is dated to 424, so contemporaneous with the Dingjiazha tomb. It states, in the 15th year of Taiping, there was no rain from spring to the 5th month. The wife of an official, Wang Xun, birthed a goblin, and the word there is yao. Her attendants were oblivious, and it vanished abruptly. Then, Xun's wife was exposed to Shi, and heavy rains fell far and wide. Does the Dingjiazha painting chronicle a similar event about a malformed baby somehow held accountable for a drought, with the nude woman representing the mother making an offering to Shi in hopes of bringing rain? An examination of the painting, along with an understanding of changing iterations of Hanba and rain rituals, spotlight beliefs that braid harsh realities with folk superstitions, and whose origins can be traced back to China's earliest written history in the 2nd millennium BCE. Let's revisit the image of the woman. Her ample stomach juxtaposed with muscular arms and legs, which led one scholar to wonder whether she was male, may indeed signify a healthy woman who had just had a baby. Looking at the expression on her face, it is composed, while the comportment of her body is deliberate as she bends to make her presentation to Shi. She is neither distracted by the animal above, nor does she appear embarrassed by her nudity. On the contrary, she seems comfortable in her skin and focused on her actions. This indicates that her behavior is codified and that a cultural practice shields her from shame. Like the textual account of Wang Xun's wife, the painting is rather matter of fact. These details suggest that the woman is performing a ritual known as Chi, involving exposure of the body to alleviate a drought. Accounts of this ancient practice can be found in oracle bone inscriptions from the Shang dynasty. These use a word pu, to expose, as a verb that takes the unclothed person as its direct object and has been interpreted to be synonymous with lu, to expose, and luo, to strip naked. Pu, the word pu is also applied in exactly the same way in the Taiping Yulan account involving Wang Xun's wife. Considering the animal more closely, we can see its spotted pelt, and he has strong hindquarters, paws, and a medium-length tail that kind of looks like a dog's. What is unusual, and what prompts scholars to describe the creature as some sort of simian, is its face. Even with the fringe of fur on its cheeks and brows, the face is disconcertingly primate-like. with widened eyes and gaping pink lips. Moreover, its front legs reach up and forward like arms. Earlier, I explained that the scholar Yue Banghu thinks that the animal represents a mythical creature named Qiangliang, quelling the drought spirit Hanba in female form. The fact is that Hanba is often associated with females, but it assumes various iterations through the centuries, and by the 5th century, it has morphed into a goblin-like animal, one with a disconcertingly human connection. The name Hanba first surfaces in the Shijing, a collection of songs that date back to from the 11th through the 7th centuries BCE. Here, Hanba is described as a nebulous entity. It washes over mountains and valleys, and it cruelly spreads pain that is likened to a sustained burn. Hanba coalesces into a more substantive form in texts compiled during the Han Dynasty, though their origins are centuries earlier. In some passages of the Li Ji, the Book of Rites, Hanba dons a female mantle, as seen in alternate names, Niu Ba, female Ba, or Hanmu, drought mother. The Shanhai Jing, the classic of mountains and seas, which one could catalog under geographic fantasy perhaps, relates the mythological origin of this female named Hanba. It says she was a celestial woman, summoned from heaven by the Yellow Emperor to strike at his enemy, Chiryo, who had unleashed an arsenal of wind and rain. Hanba vanquished Chiryo, but afterwards failed to return home. Instead, she roamed the north, compelling people to rework water channels, to open irrigation sluices, and to perform rain rituals. The Shanhai Jing also states that the female shamans sometimes dressed up in the role of Hanba and exposed or even literally broiled themselves as part of rituals to bring rain. Even though Hanba assumes a distinctly female form in some texts, in others we see it manifest as a sprite or an elf. And the word there is Wang. The Zhouzhuan, a 3rd century text that is based on earlier records, blatantly discourages the custom of burning a sprite to combat drought, and it outlines practical alternatives like fortifying city walls and conserving food. In one discussion between Duke Mu and his advisor Xianzi, recounted in the Li Ji, meanwhile, strips away euphemisms altogether and exposes what is really at stake. The Duke asks Xianzi what he thinks about exposing a sprite to bring rain. Xianzi answers plainly, to expose a sick person would be cruel, not to mention disagreeable to the mother. The choice of the word sprite, with its association of someone small, along with the concern for the mother, suggests that this sick person is a baby or a child. In another passage, the Zhouzhuan explains the difference between shamans and sprites. And Wu Wang, it explains, is a female shaman who prays for rain. A Wang, on the other hand, is not a shaman. It is a person with a spinal sickness and eyes high on the face. According to folklore, heaven pities his illness. Fearing that water will enter the person's nose, heaven deliberately makes a drought. Because of this, everyone wants to burn the person. The Shen Yi Jing, the classic of divine marvels, believed to have been written around the late 2nd century, uses a shortened moniker, Ba, and describes the drought spirit as short, less than a meter in height, naked, with eyes high on his face, moving fast like the wind, and leaving the land parched and red wherever he is seen. This passage is credited with shaping iterations of the drought spirit in the Six Dynasties. When the Dingjiazha tombs were painted, these texts describe Ba as pint-sized and eerie-looking. One such account claims to have found a dead Ba, and another tells of a female Ba captured alive. Literary scholars today believe that at some point Ba became conflated with an entity called a Ji, defined in the Han Dynasty dictionary, the Shuowen Jiezi, as a baby born a ghost. A Qin Dynasty text excavated from a tomb in 1975 uses a similar term, guiying, to denote a newborn whose bones are outside of its body and whose constant need for nursing wears out the mother. By the Six Dynasties, this ghost baby had morphed into a troublesome creature who moved backwards, sometimes with one foot, and who delighted in upsetting people. Oh, no problem at all. Now, returning to the painting and looking through the lens of these texts, the details take on new significance. Like later descriptions of Henba, the creature in the tree appears agitated, and he's on the move. Its eyes are indeed high on its face, not to mention wide and pleading like a child's. The pink ring of the mouth could be that of a child wailing or hoping to latch onto the breast. A hallmark of tomb paintings from the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries in Dingjiazha's surrounding municipality of Jiuquan is that they encapsulate dramatic tensions with ingenious economy. A few flicks of a dry brush in some instances, a strategic dash of color in others, or even a gesture can endow these paintings that are somewhat cursory with emotion, suspense, and allegory. In this regard, a particularly compelling aspect of this image is the compositional relationship between the animal in the tree and the woman below. The woman faces to the right. She leans her torso forward and reaches down with her hands. The animal above her is slightly offset to the right, and he faces the opposite direction. It lifts its torso and extends its forelegs upwards and to the left of the image. The figures are separated along a vertical axis, but if this were collapsed, the woman and the creature fit together like puzzle pieces, evoking the profound attachment between a mother and a child, one that endures even after separation. And the only inconsistency or question here is the relative size between the woman and the animal. Obviously too close to be a mother and a child. But relative size in Chinese paintings, in tombs and otherwise, indicates importance rather than physical stature. And here, it could signal the significance of the mother and child are equal in the unfolding drama. So, heavy with the story of Henba, we have a new reading of the identities and relationships in the painting. The tree on the platform is Shi. The animal in the branches is active and frantic, with eyes high on the face, representing Henba and possibly a real baby born with a congenital defect. As for the nude woman, she is the mother of the malformed infant, exposing herself to Shi in lieu of Henba, like the shamans of old and like her contemporary, Wang Xun's wife. So let's see how this new reading of the painting aligns with the architecture and the decor to determine whether it supports a cohesive program in the tomb. The painting's placement is located on the bottom of the south wall, and it's situated amongst terrestrial imagery that shows an idealized version of life in this area. And this indicates that it is something that takes place in this world. The tree is encircled by lush fields and fertile trees. And the fields you can see are being plowed, harrowed, and harvested by happy farmers. And in this case, we have someone in Sogdian dress riding a harrow and behind a rather high-stepping, happy ox. Above this, jagged mountains mark the transition between the wall and the ceiling panel that slopes inwards. And gallivanting lightly over these peaks, there's a celestial deer who is associated with blessings. He darts amongst coiled clouds and congealed qi, or the life breath of the Tao. And then you can also see up on the outer, I guess it's on the next slide. Here's a close-up of the deer with all of its energy. And then up here is an immortal woman. She's sort of surfing the vapors, as it were. We'll give her a close-up because she is figuratively as divine as she is literally. And these vapors come from the mouth of a dragon head that dangles from above. So here's the whole scheme. The dragon head comes down. This ceiling panel converges along with the other 4 ceiling panels up at the apex in the Zaojing, and there you have a lotus petal flower. And then here's all of the clouds and the chi, the immortal woman, and the deer and the mountains. And up here, a little hermit in a cave. Looking at the imagery on the other walls, we see a similar scheme. The north wall shows the butchering and drying of meat, gathering of mulberry leaves to make silk, and plowing, harrowing, and reaping. A ziping, which is an ox-drawn carriage that was very popular at the time, also sits to one side and beckons with the promise of a country outing. Again, mountains divide heaven and earth, and a heavenly horse gallops above the mountain ridges and under a dragon's head. The east and west walls frame the structure of the tomb and the burial chamber, respectively. Now, the east wall is populated by herds of animals, and you can see here it's being resolutely guarded by a large Tibetan mastiff. And then over here you have a kitchen, and that is being rather dubiously guarded by a Tibetan mastiff. And up here, little citadels with their crenulated walls amongst fields, and there is the King Father of the East. As he perches on his peak, he faces the Queen Mother of the West on the opposite wall, the west wall. And she sits in celestial splendor underneath a dragon's head and gazing down on a scene of entertainment that is laid out for the tomb, the male tomb occupant. Musicians pluck their strings, acrobats tumble and flip, and dancers display their grace, while the tomb occupant assumes a regal pose under his canopy. And so his position reflects that of the Queen Mother of the West. They each have their little canopy being held by a servant. I'll also note again that their size is much larger because they are more important than their servants. Though he does not presume to show himself frontally, because one wants to stay in the Queen Mother of the West's good graces, nor is he directly underneath her. Below him, carts and drivers wait for the guests who are enjoying the banquet. As in many early Chinese tombs, the paintings and architecture in the front chamber encapsulate the cosmos in auspicious alignment with the terrestrial world below and the celestial world above. The Dingjiazha tomb also follows aspects of local tomb styles. It has a sunken floor with a raised platform in the front chamber, and this gives it the effect of a courtyard of the occupant's manor and surrounded by the occupant's estate, as shown in the paintings. And all underneath this heavenly canopy that is filled with immortals and auspicious creatures. One purpose of the tomb is to provide for one of the souls of the deceased, there being more than one soul in Chinese eschatology, and to give it comfort, safety, and repose. To this aim, tombs are outfitted with replicas or imagery not only of delights and entertainments, but of the conditions and processes that make these possible. So it's not sufficient just to have a banquet. That might just be a one-time event. Instead, you really have to show the plowing, the harrowing, the planting and harvesting, along with the pasturing, the butchering, cooking, and the serving. Considering this, it appears that the scene of the woman animal, and tree does not merely sit amongst earthly views of prosperity and abundance, it underpins them. The tree grows from the center of the platform and stretches out above pointing towards the bounty that surrounds it, so to these fields and to the orchards on either side. Even looking high above at the celestial scenes on the south wall, we can imagine that if the dragon, the bringer of rain as it were to allow us to fasten a plumb line to its snout, this would drop down directly to the woman below. In fact, her alignment with the dragon is mirrored by that of the Queen Mother of the West, who likewise directly sits beneath a dragon's head on the adjacent wall. What appears to be two disparate painting styles in the tomb form another important clue about the image's meaning. So some of the scenes in the tomb, those of farming and that depict more mundane tasks of producing food, appear to be copied from templates found in nearby tombs and dating to more than a century earlier. So such tombs like those in the neighborhood of Xincheng in Jiayuguan, which is really next door. These two tombs are so close to each other. These are about 100 years or so earlier, and they're very expressive in their quality, the calligraphic brush line and such. And you can see here this quotidian drama of someone trying to stack hay and these advancing birds as though they're going to try to steal some of it. And the farmer has to try to gather the goods before the birds take some away. And this has been replicated down here, but in a more cursory fashion. It doesn't make as much sense. It's not infused with this sense of everyday drama of life. So you have this farmer, he's sort of just waving around the rake, looks more like he's flagging down a taxi than trying to gather up the grain. And the grain is stacked up very small and flat. One might mistake it for cheese rather than a nice haystack. And the birds seem to be passing by. So there's many of these examples that you see between these two tombs, with the earlier ones seeming to have been original products, and these ones derivative. This second-hand style that we see in Dingjiazha for the rote production of food does contrast with what we see in the banquet scene, for instance, around the tomb occupant. This is vivid and lively, as is the painting of the tree and the woman. So these indicate an exceptional event that merits original artistry rather than a stock image. Comparing this to the scene of the tree, we see that it is infused with equal energy. The tree branches writhe and reach like tentacles. The animal scampers along the branch and seems to call out pitifully. And the woman concentrates on her ritual of exposure and offering. The she tree is flourishing. The surrounding field, or the surrounding fruit orchard and mulberry trees are in full leaf. The fields above and around are thriving. And the tomb occupant is shown enjoying the delights of his good fortune. Heavenly creatures cavort above, and the King Father of the East and the Queen Mother of the West gaze down with approval. In this way, the story of Hanba not only fits in within the tomb program, it is a vital part of it. The nude woman may bear partial responsibility for what was perceived to be a miscarriage of nature's workings, yet the surrounding scenes show that her sacrifice realigned the cosmic and natural forces, quickening life and alleviating want for the community. Now, if we return above ground and consider the situation of the tomb in time and space, the Six Dynasties is a time when the area around Jiuquan and the Hexi corridor really came into its own. In the 3rd century, as the rest of northern China descends into warfare, famine, and depravity as after the fall of the Han Dynasty, In the Hexi corridor, local elites are emerging from the ranks of what had been Chinese military farmer colonies, and they're able to consolidate control of this region. They leverage the infrastructure put in by the Han. So, for instance, there's irrigation and defensive walls and forts, and they're so far away from the powers that are fighting in the rest of northern China around the Central Plain that even though they're nominally under their control, the fact is that the people in the center don't have the armies to send out to the Hexi corridor. As long as they agree to just pay their respects, they're left on their own. And so with this area emerges as a very prosperous and stable sanctuary. A depiction of the Hexi corridor from the Hanshu may have depicted the region, or may have described the region as an exotic frontier when it was written in the 1st century CE. But amid these upheavals in the 3rd century and after the fall of the Han, it likely beckoned as a sanctuary of peace and prosperity. It says in the Hanshu, west of Wei, which is the beginning of the Hexi corridor, the land is vast and the people are few. The water and grass are suitable for animal husbandry, and the livestock of Old Liangzhou, which is the old name for the area, is the most plentiful under heaven. Officials and the people have a mutual affection. Bandits are few. There is an atmosphere of harmony and virtue compared to the administrations in China's interior. So it sounds like Canada. The proximity of grasslands and farmlands were ideal for a varied economy, and the food supply and the vastness of the land allowed the region to absorb waves of refugees throughout the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries. And the population really does increase substantially at this time, even though it takes precipitous declines elsewhere in China. And it's possible that these migrations might have even spurred a direct connection between the area around Jiuquan and the state of Yan, where the account involving the exposure of Wang Xun's wife took place. And Yan is very far away. It's in the far northeast of China. But archaeologists have previously noted that the features of the dancers and the nude woman in the Dingjiazha tombs, particularly the blocky brows, these large pink lips, are reminiscent of images, fragments of images found in tombs in China's Liaoning province and dated to the 7th year of Taiping, so around 415, just a few years away from the account of Wang Xun's wife making the exposure to She. And it may even be possible that the image of the nude woman, as well as the immortal female surfing in the clouds above, represent one of the 2 female tomb occupants, the corpses that were found in the Dingjiazha tomb. The image of the male occupant there enjoying the banquet is less a portrait and rather what is considered a seat for the soul, that then after death the soul could come and occupy that position and enjoy the banquet and the entertainments. And at this time, the Hexi corridor is undergoing profound changes. Power is rotating very rapidly. So we do see a switch between tombs that are 100 years earlier than the Dingjiazha tombs, the ones that I showed the picture of the farmer stacking hay, and the later Dingjiazha tomb. So these tombs at Xincheng and Xigoucun, now they're considered separate areas because one is affiliated with the town of Jiuquan and the other with the town of Jiayuguan, but they really are so close to one another, and the Dingjiazha tomb is right about here. So all in close proximity, but these tombs from the 3rd, early 4th century show a boldness in architecture and also in the way that they show the tomb occupants. And this does differ from the Dingjiazha tombs. So the first thing one notices when going into these tombs is this feature that in the Dingjiazha tomb was very short and quite plain. This facade above the entrance to the tomb, these soar up. Some of them are 18 meters tall, and they're made of rather crudely carved brick, but these scalloped bricks are a representation of Dogong, that bracket of Chinese architecture. And so this is a very tall tower with some sort of heavenly door here that beckons to one of the souls, even as the corpse continues through and into the front chamber. Some of the tombs have 2 chambers, some have 3, but always the back chamber is this barrel vaulted structure. And I'll show you a couple pictures from inside. Here there's a few other differences as well. In the Dingjiazha tomb from late 4th, early 5th century, we did have that sunken floor and the platform. And so this is a well-established tradition that is made by these tombs in the 3rd century. And one of the reasons that it's so explicit that this represents a courtyard is because most of these tombs have a model well in them as well, inset in one corner. So just a pot buried and then a tile on top with some sort of vessel up above. And also you can barely see it here in the sketch, but there's acroteria on the corners. So all of this shows that this is a courtyard under an open sky. And the representations of the architecture and the paintings is more complex than in the Dingjiazha tomb. So you have a lot of these structures, little brackets, oftentimes little niches, and this shows the area of different buildings and such around the tomb manor, residence halls and that kind of thing. And then further up the wall, you get further away from the estate and into the region. So it shows surrounding fields, and then a lot of different minority groups are also shown in these tombs. And the way that the tomb occupants are rendered in these tombs is also quite different from the Dingjiazha tomb, as well as from early Han Dynasty models of how tomb occupants should show themselves. So people are shown very with a great deal of optimism and with a strong sense of individuality. And you have things like women riding on horseback, donning a nomadic apparel here. She's riding behind her husband, and they're part of an entourage, one of whom has a nomadic name. So one of the entourage is Bing Sun Jing, soldier Sun Jing, and the other is Bing Hu Danian, barbarian soldier Danian. And then you also have this same woman shown, she's probably one of these 2 people, and very animated in conversation, rising up a little bit, flapping her sleeves, so not a model of Confucian feminine virtue in this tomb. This is an occupant from another tomb. There's pictures of her selecting her jewelry, and as you can see here, she's enjoying a ginormous kebab. So people show themselves in what they like to do, as opposed to presenting themselves as models of Confucian virtue. And we also have displays of power in these earlier tombs. This one is part of a series of 3 panels that shows the tomb occupant leading out his army. And they have an encampment in one scene, and they're on the march, and at the very end it looks as though he's going to go out of the entrance of the tomb and sort of re-enter the world. And he's been highlighted in red by the painter to set him even more apart. And this picture is quite interesting because these appear to be some of the models for the Dingjiazha tombs. The only place one sees minorities or different ethnicities other than ethnic Han in the Dingjiazha tombs is in the role of farming. And here there's someone who's probably a Xianbei farming. He has shaved temples and bare feet. And this person with a heavy coat belted at the waist is probably a Sogdian. So when this time of optimism in the 3rd and early 4th centuries, by the time the Dingjiazha tomb is built, there seems to be a reversion back to Han Dynasty styles and more of an Eastern or Northern style. The Dingjiazha tombs adopts a template that is much more similar to Heling-Gerar or something like that from the Han Dynasty. And this, the Dingjiazha tombs are also a time where, even though they just span a few decades, they could be placed in the states of the later Liang, in the Western Liang, or in the northern Liang. So power is changing very quickly at this time. And the other thing that's happening is that Buddhism is advancing along the Silk Roads and is growing under patronage from local rulers and the efforts of monks, translators, and craftspeople. And this resulted in the construction of magnificent cave temples. And today, cave temples at Mogao, near Dunhuang, and other cave temples like Binglingsi down outside of Lanzhou, and there are some cave temples, Wenshushan and such, outside of Jiuchuan. These merit a lot of attention from scholars. But the Dingjiazha tomb is constructed exactly at this time where the focus is going away from tombs towards building these temples. But the Dingjiazha tomb, and especially the painting of the woman, remind us that the persistence of folk beliefs surrounding people's deep fears can pop up, sort of like Hamba, unexpectedly. And as for our drought monster, he occasionally surfaces in texts through time. By the 11th century, he is firmly fused with a ghost baby and morphs into a goblin-shaped youngster who cannot be controlled. People try to kill it, but it flees by day, covertly coming home by night to nurse at its mother's breasts, according to different texts and legends. And the practice of ritual exposure likewise continued. Edward Schaeffer, writing in 1951, reports that he met a professor who, as a child in Gansu, had personally witnessed a local sorceress exposing herself to bring rain. And so it seems that age-old superstitions and associated practices, whether benign or brutal, endure. They may go off the historical record for a time, but they still spread underground, and like a rhizome, they sprout up across vast distances and over centuries in times of want or fear. Thank you.